Ready, Anna? Good evening and welcome to tonight's May 27th, 2025 Committee of the Whole. Clerk will call the roll, please.
Tauschak.
Here.
Hartman.
Here.
Matzdorf.
Here.
Gilson.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Penquitz.
Here.
Binder.
Yes.
Sandy.
Here.
Let the record show we have a quorum. Next is the approval of the minutes from May 13th, 2025. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion approved.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, discussion and possible recommendation on ground cover ordinance. Tonight, we have Jack here to give us a little startup information.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, similar to the last meeting, this is just kind of getting some feelers up for you guys. Currently, our ordinances regulate lawns in terms of like grass height, noxious weeds, natural lawns, etc. We don't have an ordinance that explicitly requires someone to plant a lawn. We have some new housing coming online soon and some other stuff that's filling in now with established subdivisions, and we just like to get something on the books. Should that be an issue with planting after, building permits issued, etc. The ordinance right now that we have in your packet gives us, as staff, discretion. It doesn't say, a lawn has to be planted by X date. It's something that we would, regulate as needed. Hopefully it's not something we have to go to very often, but something we wanted on the books should issue arise. So at this point, just looking for general feedback and some sort of endorsement, and then we'd bring back a fleshed out ordinance probably at the June meeting.
And Mayor, I think I would just add, the reason this is coming before the committee of the whole now is we have a couple of homes that are being finished, and there's a feud between a builder and a property owner, and neither one will put a lawn in. And so we have no teeth in our current ordinance to make it happen. And eventually, right, certainly there's a period of time after a new home is built, right, you have to have the right weather and the conditions to get the lawn in. But if it goes 12, 18 months, right, you're going to have neighbors that are upset that a lawn is not in. So that's part of the reason for this ordinance to take place. And with the new subdivision coming online with the SEEDC, something to make sure that we have in place before that as well.
Where is our enforcement process if we have someone who says no? Where do we go to enforce it? How
If
is
someone, the way the ordinance is written right now? Or
well
the lack
under
of-
the new one?
Typically, it would be enforced on like a complaint-based system. So if we have like a general complaint that comes into City Hall, I usually inspect the validity of it and then write out the letter or, call them and give them some sort of timeline to rectify it. So we'd probably follow a similar process to that.
And Mayor, I think what would happen then if they didn't do that, they would be issued a municipal citation.
Correct.
Yeah, we ultimately go the citation route.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, okay. Seasonally, it could be difficult, but certainly.
Sure.
John?
Our language is kind of specific in terms of what a lawn is. Basically, I think it's called, we're talking about foliage, that covers
Correct.
the lawn area. But I know I've been in other communities, visiting relatives and stuff, and I've seen lawns that were synthetic grass, turf lawns, they call them. I've seen wildflower meadows as a type of lawn. And then I've also seen, on a trip up north, I saw somebody had a lawn that was all small pebbles. So I'm just wondering if we're being too specific, or what we maybe should add to the language is if anyone wants one that does not fit the description here, they can appear before the whatever committee would make a decision and make a recommendation to the council.
Sure. We do have an ordinance right now that regulates natural lawns as being native plantings, and that gives some folks, we have a couple folks in town that have that permit. It lets them grow, native species, so
Right.
it's not just a typical grass, right? In terms of synthetic and pebble, I don't think there's anything in the ordinance right now that would allow that.
Yeah.
So if there's some interest in the council, that could be something we could add to the ordinance before it gets back to you for final adoption, but I would probably ask for some buy-in from the rest of the council.
Great.
But, you know, I kind of agree with John, maybe we're going too far, but, you know, legally, they can cement their whole yard.
Yeah,
Cemented, period.
We do
So
have.
how far are we going? Yeah.
We do have some setbacks for pavement from property lines, but yeah, hypothetically, if they wanted to go to the letter of the ordinance, they could.
Or how about a desert one?
Hmm,
You
sure.
know, how far do we want to go?
That's
I
improved.
think it's got to be looked at a little more, Jack, and I think it's got to be a little more give and take throughout that,
Mhm.
and then we can maybe change the ordinance
Okay,
to meet that subject, you know?
sure.
But you're crossing off yard area and replacing it with lawn. So if you're gonna cement the whole thing, I don't think that's considered lawn.
It's a good argument, yeah, I
It's
would,
an example.
right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely take this feedback and, you know, alter the ordinance with that kind of, you know, thoughts.
Be a
on that. I
lot
mean,
more
get some-
specific to that.
Yeah,
Kid
a bit
gets
more
some
specific,
feedback.
and, but again, you know, it's something that we hope we don't have to typically go for, but it's just something we want to have in our back pocket should we need to enforce it. So, yeah, we can definitely take the ordinance, revise it a bit, and bring it back to you guys once we feel that we're meeting your request, so.
That would be great.
Sure.
In Arizona, they have lawns that are colored stone.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when John was talking about pebbles, it's usually an
And
issue with growing,
so
it's pretty expensive. I think.
You've got the pebble, but you've got stone.
Mhm.
And obviously, different areas of the country have different aesthetics that are
I always remember a trip up Highway 13 to Phillips, Wisconsin. There's a property that has, everything is small pebbles, they're white pebbles. That's their lawn.
They do that in California too.
Yeah. There's a lot of synthetic ones there.
Right.
But the reasons they do it is they have limitations on watering, and it's tough to establish a lawn, and some of those,
Yeah, I think people with lawns in Arizona have, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of extra money.
I would say do a little homework and,
Sure. Yeah,
Bring it
we'll
back.
definitely do that and work
Jack.
with our city attorney, bring something back that we're
You know.
confident we can enforce and it's a bit more detailed. So goal tonight was just to get some general feedback from you guys.
you know, those examples are typical to the Midwest per se, but is that what we're trying to prevent as well?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's all I got.
See what you've got.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next item, presentation from Ehlers on municipal bonding 101 and TIF 101. Tim, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll give a quick
Comment,
kickoff
please.
comment, and then I will introduce Kayla Thorpe, who's our municipal advisor from Ehlers. So again, Ehlers serves as our financial advisor. They provide support for tax increment district creation, debt issuance, and a bunch of other financial services. Given the upcoming planning for borrowing and creation of upcoming TID number 8, Ehlers is going to provide a financial overview tonight, debt financing 101 and capital improvements 101. I have a sort of rundown in the packet. I don't want to steal too much of Kayla's thunder. The city's current debt usage is about 6%. The success of TID 4 is really going to benefit the city. We're going to have a levy limit adjustment coming up for budget year 26. Again, we're going to talk about, as part of the budget process, using that closure limit and the ability to claim abated debt to really support some long-term capital projects up to the 2025 assessed mill rate. Again, the presentation is going to go through the debt schedule that we're kind of working on over the next month or so, the projects we're planning forward in the next couple of years. So Kayla's going to talk about that, and then Kayla's going to talk through sort of TID 101, kind of the next steps for us and upcoming to date. So with that, I'll leave it to Kayla.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Gail Thorpe. As Tim said, I'm a municipal advisor at Ehlers. I've been at the firm about 2 years. And prior to that, I was a city administrator for 10 and worked in local government for 15 years in total. So pretty understanding of some of the projects and things you have going on, and really happy to help assist your team in doing that. The reason why we are here tonight on the debt and TID education is, one, we have some new people in the room. 2, you haven't borrowed in a while, so kind of undergoing a review of some of the new state statutes that govern municipal borrowing. And then with the upcoming TID 8 creation, just giving someone or all of you kind of a level playing field as to what you'll be seeing in the next couple months. Let's start with borrowing, and why do Wisconsin governments borrow? There's a number of reasons or projects why governments may consider borrowing, and a lot of them have to do with facilities, infrastructure, and equipment. As you just heard, there is a large lead time and a large cost to some of the pieces of equipment that are needed to operate your community, and sometimes cash funding those, or most of the times cash funding those, is not a realistic option. And so we take a look at what the municipal bond market looks like for those, as well as street utility and sidewalks, as well, and any public facility are traditionally what we'll see people borrow for. This is on the government side. There's a whole slew of things you could borrow for when it relates to TID districts or private activity bonds, but I'm really going to keep it simple and just talk about general obligation today. There's a number of capital financing mechanisms. Pay as you go, meaning you're going to pay cash for it. You're going to levy for it or save for it over a number of years, and then you're going to end up buying that. You're using your existing budget or cash on hand. This is efficient for small purchases or short-lived assets, but under levy limit constraints, it's difficult to save, it's difficult to levy, and you're really eating levy capacity to fund capital when there's other avenues to fund these purchases. One thing you'll hear on this presentation, and also as we talk about some utility things, is generational equity. If we look at a road where the road may be a 25 or 30-year asset and you're paying cash for that, the people using it in 20 or 30 years are not paying for that. The people who are using it today are paying for it. And so by amortizing those type of large projects out over the 20-year period, the people who are benefiting from that road or that piece of equipment at that point in time are paying for it. Internal loans, and really this is kind of a one bucket to the other as far as the city's concerned, is one fund lending funds to another, or cash advancing funds. Can be both borrowed or cash on hand. And we don't traditionally see these much for capital type projects outside utilities. You may have utilities that share money to get a project done quickly, but those really things should be memorialized in a ordinance or resolution, as well as on hand with your auditors. This can create cash flow and fund balance issues if you are taking on large projects within your utilities or internal funds where you're kind of borrowing money from one bucket to another. And so again, these are best operated on a small size or short-lived project basis. And then the reason why we're really here is debt issuance. One, because after 25 years of levy limits now, debt issuance and the cost of debt is one of the only widely used levy limit exemptions available to any community in the state, meaning you are exempt from levy limits when it comes to principal and interest payments on general obligation debt. You can increase your property tax levy on an equivalent basis to the increase in your principal and interest payments annually. And so if you take a look at your budget, you'll have an understanding of what your principal and interest payments are. That's exempted on line E of the levy limit form, removed from your levy when it's calculated next year, and then added back in when you fill out that form. Really an exercise of math more than anything, but just kind of a baseline there. This really preserves any levy capacity you would have to be used for operations and be deployed at the appropriate time. And it's amortized over its full useful life, and we get to that generational equity type thing, where the asset is being paid for by the benefit of the user. Where we come into play with Ellers is we really try to mitigate any tax rate fluctuations and tax rate stabilization, meaning as we take on new debt, we will structure that around your existing debt profile, and I'll show you here in a little bit what that means. And so we avoid any peaks and valleys in your debt service tax rate, because that really, in a lot of times, is your biggest driver of tax levy change, and we don't want to structure debt payments that are going to cause large fluctuations, because it makes for an unstable tax levy and really is a detriment to your taxpayers because they cannot prepare for what the peak or valley may be in any upcoming year. A number of pledges and security is general obligation. General obligation, the pledge is the full faith and credit of your property taxing authority. Revenue obligations are traditionally issued for utilities in which the revenue is the pledge from the utility, or appropriation. We hardly ever see this in Wisconsin, which is just meaning that it is subject to an annual appropriation in the budget, which is sometimes the same as your property tax levy, but in the bond market, it's looked at a little differently. So you will hardly ever see appropriation pledges in Wisconsin outside of kind of TIF district things, but even then, we'll issue that more on a general obligation basis. As of March 31st of 2024, general obligation promissory notes have become kind of the in thing. Some of the restrictions for general obligation promissory notes were released by the legislature last year, where you may have seen general obligation bonds be issued here before, meaning issue specific. So we need $700,000 for utilities, you have to adopt a resolution under the bond structure for that amount for that utility. $1 million for a road project, a separate resolution for that one. General obligation notes gets away with all of that, makes it administratively more feasible to approve projects or fund projects on a flexible basis, where you are now authorizing a sale not to exceed $1.7 million, which are going to be used for utility, road, electric, whatever those projects are. The real impetus behind this was driven by the Towns Association, because towns no longer need to seek electorate approval for projects that are going to be amortized over 10 years. So cities and villages got the administrative benefit, towns got the time benefit, but we are unlikely to see municipal bonds issued anymore. It will all be general obligation promissory notes. Where that benefits the city is you could potentially borrow for 2 years worth of projects at once, or redeploy funds should a project fall through. Meaning, if you borrow for a road project but the bids come in too high, you're going to reject the bid, but we're going to buy a truck with that, you can do that administratively without having to adopt new bond covenants and new bond resolutions. Yeah, I just talked about that. Just talking about a little bit of the process and timing. While you will see this once or twice before you, there is a lot of behind the scenes work that has been going on between our firm and your staff to plan and get to the point of authorizing the issuance of debt. The pre-sale resolutions to authorize a not to exceed number will be coming back at your to the council's June 24th meeting. But we have been working along staff for the last number of months actually on this debt issuance and getting an understanding of what the costs are, what utilities are playing into this, what is the timing relative to issuing the debt, and when you need the money to execute your projects. About the marketing and bond sale, or bond marketing and sale time is about 2 months from your authorization. This is a little shorter time because this is not a large dollar amount we're going to be issuing for. But during that time, we are preparing the official statement. We are having a rating call with Moody's Investor Service to get a credit rating. We are marketing this on a competitive basis to the open market. And then it culminates on sale day, where we accept bids on the city's behalf. And we will award to the lowest qualified bidder based on a true interest cost basis. And so all of that kind of happens on our end here at Ellers, but what you will see is an authorizing resolution to award the sale and kind of move on from there. 2 to 4 weeks after we award the sale, we close, meaning that's when the city receives the funds in their checking account to then be deployed to pay for project costs. We have portions of this debt issuance that are being amortized over 20 years. So over that 20 years, there is administrative things that need to happen. Obviously, you need to pay your principal and interest payments on an annual basis. But the city is also subject to a continuing disclosure agreement, meaning anytime material changes happen in the city's financial position, new debt is taken on, large fluctuations in the tax base that must be reported through a system called EMMA. And that basically is just a full disclosure to the people who own your bonds or your notes that things have happened in the community. We at Ellers handle that on your behalf. We have an annual continuing disclosure agreement with the city. And so it's really just making that annual notification to report to the investors who have purchased your debt. The positive with local governments borrowing, and one thing you might have heard from, because I know you all attend, or some of you attended a lobby day in DC, was that tax exempt debt was on the chopping board from the federal government this year. Communities in Wisconsin or across the nation can issue general obligation debt on a tax exempt basis, meaning that debt holders are exempt from claiming it kind of as a income tax issue on federal taxes across the country. In Wisconsin, it's not exempt, so it doesn't really affect Wisconsin taxes, but it is a privilege that communities have to issue debt on a tax exempt basis. It makes it a more attractive product because it's a low risk. Communities are going to have the ability to back that with property taxes, and then they don't, the investors don't have to pay income taxes on that. You can also issue taxable debt. Again, we don't usually see that unless it's a TIF project. What we at Ellers do is we kind of advise on what the appropriate timing is. What does the current market conditions look like? We assist with the assembly of the financing team, which is our documents team, your city staff, and myself. Recommending the structure, size, and timing. We prepare the offering statement on your behalf and all of the disclosure documents. We work with bond counsel to get a legal opinion on the taxability of the projects, and kind of all of those administrative functions that culminate into what you will see both on June 24th and I think July 12th is our tentative sale date, and those nice kind of just package resolutions that you will see. We are paid a flat fee from the issuance based off of the par value, which is the value after issuance costs of the note. So the next slide is kind of what we call our base case. This is an existing debt profile for the city, which is nice that it fits on one slide because most communities I work with have very extensive debt profiles. And so the current city debt on a general obligation basis is fully amortized by 2031. Meaning you only have a few years of existing debt payments left. Those are abated, meaning there are offsetting revenues paying for a portion of that debt that come from the water utility, TID5, and TID6. So if we move from left to right on this chart, that is your total general obligation payments regardless of your payment source on an annual basis. And then we net out which other products or which other funds are paying for debt, and then we get to a net debt service levy. Your property tax backed debt expires in 2027. Unheard of. That you only have 3 more years of general obligation debt backed by property taxes. So that's why you will see some large fluctuations in your debt service tax levy is because we're at the end of the life of the city's existing debt. We project out an equalized tax base just to kind of give you a level playing field on what that means. And currently in 2025, your debt service tax levy on an equalized basis was 40 cents per thousand, meaning on the average of a $100,000 home. And I'm not saying that's the average home in the city. I like to use $100,000 because it's easily multiplied in my head based off of the value of your house. So on a $100,000 home in the city, $40.20 of your 25 tax bill went to pay for debt. Again, very low. Now we take a look at not only what we're planning for 2025, but we like to preliminary look out a number of years to get an understanding of what that property tax impact is going to be. So my preface of when we talk about 26 and 27 projects is they are preliminary and they are placeholders. No decisions obviously have been made to borrow or commit to those funding sources or those projects. It is simply an exercise to get an understanding of what would be the tax impact if we went all in on these projects. So for 2025, we are preliminary estimating just over $7 million of capital improvement projects. This has drastically changed in the last few weeks because we moved the TID 8 West Stafford Street project from 2026 to 2025 because the TID creation and project construction time has accelerated since when we started talking about this in January. And then in 2026, about $4 million, in 2027, about $2 million. So over the next 3 years, about $13 million in potential project costs. Again, this breaks out, and so it becomes very transparent of what are any cash that's being applied to your projects, and there is some grant funds, and then capital fund reserves that are being applied to downsize the amount that you need to borrow in 25 to accomplish these projects, along with all of the cost of issuances, meaning you have a bond counsel who will write the legal opinion, You have a rating agency fee, you have a paying agent fee, which means that our firm sends timely reminders as to when you need to pay your principal and interest payment, so you don't default. Because if you default on a principal and interest payment, just kind of like if you default on a credit card payment, there's penalties, but it also reduces your credit worthiness and is kind of like a black mark on the city. So our firm will send a reminder about 2 months in advance that you need to wire us the fund, and then we work with the depository trust, which is the clearinghouse for all bond payments in the world, actually. So after that, we get to that net borrowing size, which in this case is about $6.9 million. So to fund $7.2 million of projects, you're only going to borrow $6.9 million. How we amortize that out, again, a very small chart, is by purpose. So we've got a portion of this borrowing that is paying for a dam project. We are amortizing that over 10 years just because of the dollar amount. There is a streets portion. We are amortizing over 5 years because we can leverage the existing debt service tax rate, meaning it's going to drop off, so we can just kind of backload to it and not amortize these things over a long period of time. And then the utility and electric and TID portions are amortized over 20 years. Now we kind of get an understanding of left to right what our existing debt profile is. If we add in our 25 issuance, which will also have abatement sources from the water and sewer utility, the electric utility, and TID 8, we can get an understanding of what the net tax levy is, and I can't even see what that would be. We get to a net tax levy in 2026 of about $571,000, which is a tax levy increase over what was projected in your base case, but then you can see that you have debt quickly fall off. And so to take on $7 million of projects, you have 1 year of levy increase, and then the levy decreases for debt. So again, a very strong position to be in to start to get aggressive on some projects and project planning, because you have the ability to take on debt and projects with essentially no impact to property taxes. And then we take a look at kind of what is the all-in. Taking those 3 years of projects, what is our all-in impact and what is the financing plan going to cost to the average taxpayer? And so if you kind of go to the bottom right-hand side, you will see what that impact is to an average of $100,000 home over the life of 23 years. And I think it's a couple $100. Let me see. And so the city is able to take on $13 million worth of projects, deliver that product back to your taxpayers for a couple $100 over the next 23 years. And so the city has been very diligent in managing its debt profile and paying for in cash as much as possible. And that benefit is paying off now with the ability to take on larger projects with a minimal tax impact. And then as Tim gave the spoiler alert, we will always do a debt capacity analysis. State statute limits the ability of the community to have debt in excess of 5% of its equalized value. So we've done some equalized value projections, and then we provide you of where your capacity is going to be. In the all-in basis, meaning if we borrow for all the projects over the next 3 years, you will max out at 21% of your debt capacity, meaning you have a residual capacity of about $51 million that you could borrow. Very, very low debt burden, very, very large capacity. And so this is kind of the prime time to get serious about capital planning and getting an understanding of what projects you want to do on the short and long term. And we have been doing that over the last couple months. And so when we take a look at this, really, I don't know if you have an internal debt policy that's what limits it. We traditionally suggest that you should never exceed 75% of your debt capacity. And so really we're talking about here is you still have 50% capacity left to borrow. And I would hope you would never need to borrow $51 million at any one point in time, but really a good position to be in to know that you have the ability to borrow that money. Any questions on debt? So the next time you will see these things, at least from Eller's perspective, will be at your June 24th meeting. My colleague Paul will be here presenting a pre-sale report, which will review kind of all the legal requirements that we've gone through, the debt amortization schedules, interest rates, kind of the process and timing. And that will authorize us to go to the market and market the sale that will happen in July.
Mayor, did you have a question?
In other words, it's taken us a long time to get to this point, but the bottom line is, it's good.
Yes. Well, I work with about 35 different communities in the state, and I think this is the lowest debt burden I've seen in any of my clients.
Good.
And we represent most communities in Wisconsin as a whole, and I would say this is a lot.
I'm glad to hear that.
When I was an administrator of a fully landlocked community, and we were butting up against 75% of our debt profile. So it's an understanding of thoughtful project planning, thoughtful budgeting, and kind of not going all in on debt financing and cash financing some projects. But you are also, like a lot of, or all communities in Wisconsin, are running out of levy capacity. You can only raise your property tax levy so much, and after 25 years of levy limits, there's only so much more efficient we can get. And so that's why we really took a look at building out 3 years of debt, just to see what it would look like. And the picture is really good, is that you can take on all of these projects with debt with very little impact to your property tax rate.
Good, thank you.
Okay, tax increment financing. You may hear two nomenclatures, TIF and TID. They're used interchangeably, but TIF is tax increment financing, which is the funding mechanism, the tool, and TID is tax increment district, which is the physical boundaries of what we are collecting the financing through. Not only is this a powerful economic development tool, it's one of the only economic development tool allowed to municipalities in Wisconsin. And how this works is it captures the incremental property tax revenue over and beyond the set base value to be pumped back into the district to pay for project costs. That might not make sense until you kind of see, I'm going to jump around, until you kind of see this. And so let's talk about TID 8, which is encompassing a number of properties in your downtown area. When and if the council takes action on creating TID 8, the property values of all of those parcels will be frozen as the base property value. That means the taxes collected on that value will be distributed to the overlying taxing jurisdictions just as they are today. The taxing jurisdictions will realize no difference on what is that base property tax value. Now, as projects happen and the hotel is developed and that property value comes online, along with any natural economic appreciation and any other property that's contained within the district, that's what we call increment. And that is where we capture that value, and the taxes collected on that value are not distributed to the overlying taxing jurisdictions. They are put within the TID fund to pay for project costs. After the TID is closed, all the value falls back online, and you're going to see this with the closure of TID 4 in your upcoming budget. All of that value comes back online, and all of that value then benefits the overlying taxing jurisdictions, and they receive the tax revenue on that full value. And practical purposes, what this does is it tanks the property tax rate. I think I modeled it out, and it was a multiple dollar decline, and that's where Tim and I have discussed some strategies to mitigate that. One, because it has a detrimental effect in all your other taxing TID districts, but also two, it spreads the property tax levy out over more value, which is really good, but you have the ability to then capture some money to cash finance projects. So it's an exercise we're going to go through in the preparation of the city's 2026 budget, but just the understanding that the value coming back online from TID 4 was $160 million. And so very successful TID. It's going to have some swings in the property tax rate, but we're going to stabilize that as much as we can. The city has three current TID districts that are open, 5, 6, and 7. 7 was just created last year, and so there is no increment yet to be collected on that, but we just kind of wanted to give you an understanding of where and how many districts the city currently has open. And then you will start to see, starting with preliminary approval by the Joint Review Board and Plan Commission next week, of TID number 8, which is to facilitate the LAC project hotel, and that as well as some potential future development of some downtown or redevelopment of downtown areas. The organizational JRB, which is the Joint Review Board, a member of each of the overlying taxing jurisdictions, as well as your planning commission, will see the project plan on June 5th. It is slated for common council action on June 24th, and then the final JRB is at a date to be determined. We usually set that at the organizational Joint Review Board. I don't want to go through any of the project plan just because Plan Commission and the Joint Review Board hasn't seen it, so I don't have anything included as far as the financing plan, but that will be distributed to you in the upcoming weeks. Why do we use TIF? Like I kind of talked about, it's one of the only economic development tools to provide direct either property relief or incentives to develop and redevelop land in Wisconsin. Really is addresses the lack of other incentives available from either local, state, or federal officials. And really is a promotion of cooperation between all of the taxing jurisdictions, because all of the taxing jurisdictions get a say, and they are essentially giving up for 20 or 27 years their increase in property tax revenue to facilitate growth and betterment within our community.
If I may interrupt at this point, the chair will allow the continuation of the presentation, even though we're closing in.
Oh, I'll wrap up soon, sorry.
That we're closing in on our council meeting. I think this is an important aspect of TIFs and financing. So we'll just continue on.
Sure.
I don't want you to cut it short.
Yeah, I think I only have a couple points left.
Yeah, with
but
the
then I'll ask
advent that
questions.
June is around the corner, certainly this is an important aspect of how we're working up to that point. So don't cut it short, and
Sure.
that's okay. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. Just to provide some context, I'm sure, because I work with some other Sheboygan County communities, that you are hearing a lot about TIF in the greater Sheboygan area. But just an understanding of statewide, how is TIF used? So this is dating back to 2000, all of the use and value within TIF districts in the entire state. TIF legislation was first introduced in 1975 and really hasn't been looked at again since, so we're still operating under those original laws. As of 1/1/24 in the entire state, there was $41.2 billion of incremental value contained within TIF districts. So all of that value is being driven by the use of TIF, but for the use of TIF would most likely not have happened. That accounts for about 4.5% of all property value within the state. And as of last April, there are 1,400 active TIDs in the state. A really good understanding is this is not just a local issue to you. This is happening across the state. This is a widely used and accepted and promoted means of economic development. There are a number of legal and statutory requirements if you are not involved in the creation of TID 7, and this will be your first kind of blush at it. There's a number of things you will see contained in the project plan, and one of those things is the 12% test. You are limited to 12% of your total equalized value to be contained within a TIF district at any point in time. You are allowed to go over and beyond that, meaning the increment value could rise above 12% naturally, or the values could appreciate. That would just prohibit you from creating any additional districts. I believe after the closure of TID 4, we're, even with the creation of TID 8, we're about 4% of that 12% test. So still significant capacity to create more TIDs if they are deemed necessary. Depending on the type of district, there are 5 different types of districts: mixed use, industrial, blighted, conservation and rehab, or environmental remediation. The first 2 have a 20-year max life, the final 3 have a 27-year max life. There are some tests that at least 50% of the proposed area contained within the district must meet certain requirements. And then there's newly platted residential requirements, and you would have seen that in test and discussed when we created TID 7, because we had to make sure that the SCEDC development accounted for less than 35% of the total area within the district because it was newly platted residential. I believe that TID 8 is a conservation and rehab district, and so has a longer time to recoup, just with the understanding that those are additional project costs to maintain conservation of buildings. There's a number of requirements of what we need to include in the project plan, because when you see the project plan, it's about 30 pages long, and most of it is text. That is statutory requirements of things that need to be contained in there. But we need to account for project costs that are known at this time, what they're going to be used for, any financing plans, a cash flow forecast, and any kind of development incentive and descriptions of those. The but-for test is one of the things you will hear commonly, even through development negotiations and TIF creation. And this is a standard that must be applied by all boards, but really needs to be substantiated by the Joint Review Board, and is kind of the hinge of the use of TIF. And what it says is, but for the use of TIF assistance, the proposed development, meaning the one we are creating the district for, would not happen as proposed, within the same time frame, and with the same value that it is being proposed. This gets commonly confused by people who are anti-TIF or don't understand this, because it doesn't mean that development wouldn't occur, period. It's the development we're looking at today, meaning let's say for TID 8, the hotel project, would not happen at its speed, size, scale, or dollar amount of value that the developer's putting in. Not that it wouldn't ever have developed, that's not what it means, but for this development and the use of TIF, it would not occur. How do we prove it? Independent third-party review of developer sources and uses, which we have done in this case. There are challenge sites, meaning there's some type of environmental remediation that might be needed. There's utility extensions that might be needed, kind of all of those things that we deal with outlot type things. There's extensive public infrastructure costs that the city would have to take on if they had to run utilities to there that could be paid for through the district. Lack of other economic development opportunities and other extenuating circumstances. Ultimately, it's the Joint Reviews Board's determination that will match all these, but we are very transparent that all committees that see this have an understanding of what the project plan says, what it means, and kind of how that but-for test is met. Just a quick rundown of the procedure of how the TID is created. There's initially a feasibility study, which we have been working on internally with your staff for the last number of months, engaging with the developer on what and the assessor on what the proposed value would be, the build-out schedule, what are the public infrastructure costs, kind of everything that we would need to see if the TID increment could support the level of assistance or debt service payments that are being proposed within the project plan. There is an initial joint review board meeting, which is going to be happening for TID 8 on June 5th, where no action is taken. It is just a first blush at the project plan. And then that same night, a plan commission public hearing will happen, at which, if the plan commission wishes to approve the TID, they will adopt a resolution recommending approval to the common council of the boundaries and the project plan. And then the governing body will take approval on June 24th, and that is the official creation date of the TID. While it goes for final JRB approval, that final JRB approval is really a records kind of review, that we have minutes, we've got a quorum vote, the record is complete, and they approve a resolution approving the TID as well. After that, our team gets to work on working with your staff and the state on approval. There are a number of maps and documents and meets and bounds descriptions that are required for state approval that we work to get those things certified. There are a number of prohibited project costs. You can't build a city hall using TID funds or within a TID district. You can't finance facilities that would traditionally be financed with utility user fees outside of any capacity upgrades. If you have any plants or pipes or infrastructure that needs to be upgraded to facilitate a development within TID district, you can pay for that, but you can't just create a new water tower that doesn't support anything within the TID. Any general governmental expenses unrelated, and then anything associated with newly platted residential outside of a mixed-use district. There's an expenditure period that ends 5 years prior to the end of the maximum life. You cannot enter into any new expenditure agreements, meaning a development agreement, debt service, anything new after that expenditure period. Anything authorized before the expenditure period ends, you can still pay through the end of the life of the district. It's just no new expenditures can be entered into And really what that does is then gives the TIF time to collect enough increment tax dollars to pay off any outstanding obligations. I'm only going to highlight pay-as-you-go type financing because it's really the only one we have recommended here in the city for a number of projects that is on the developer. And it is just kind of as it reads. The developer pays taxes as they go, and they take on the liability to install any kind of infrastructure on their site. The upfront costs of construction. There's no upfront dollars from the city being given to the developer to make the project happen. They're taking on all that liability on their own, and as they pay taxes into the district, then it's a reimbursement back on the annual property taxes that generates. And that is all memorialized in the development agreement that would be approved by your council. One thing I'd like to point out as part of this process too is that the TIF creation process does not marry the city to any public projects, does not marry you to a proposed development, and it does not circumvent any other approval processes that would normally be in place, i.e. a development agreement coming through Plan Commission or Council. That does not waive those requirements. This just facilitates the means to finance for it. And let's get that, and that's kind of all I had. So this is just kind of the flow of cash when we're talking about a pay-go, is that the developer pays in, the new value is created, they get a reimbursement that's agreed upon in the development agreement. And that is really the crux of what was TID 7 and what will be today and any other future TID that we work on with the city. I know it's a lot of information in a very short period of time, so I know Tim and your city staff are very competent and can help answer questions, but you're also free to either ask or reach out to me separately if there's any questions.
This truly is a 101 process, very complicated for sure. The ability to leverage in our situation is probably the best it's ever been in my tenure. And I think that we have established a fund policy that continues to generate the pay-as-you-go model so that there's minimum risk out there. Those are significant, and you touched on a lot of information tonight. For the council, if you have questions, don't hesitate to check with Tim, and he can be in touch with you and do some in-depth if that's necessary. TIF is not easily understood.
No.
And it is certainly a tool, as you laid out in your presentation, that Wisconsin has used very extensively for different communities. And certainly we've used it here in Plymouth as well. So our timeline is started. You mentioned June 5th and so on. So those wheels are turning. The total that you laid out for the next 3 years, it seems high, but it doesn't even come close to touching our capacity.
No.
Which I think is important for those that might want to submit a bid for bonding. It certainly gives them a lot of security. I don't know how many communities only have 3 years left on financing. Can't be too many. We're glad of that.
This plan does too is, let's take just a look at the tax rate, is that in 3 years, your tax rate for debt service is going from 40 cents a thousand to 0. that is going to have this peaks and valleys kind of effect that we're trying to avoid. So whether it's the 13 million or whether it's half of that or whether it's double of that, continuing to take on debt, and in personal life, debt is looked at as a bad thing. In municipal life, it's actually a good thing. That means you're doing projects, that you are utilizing the benefits available to you, and that you're being proactive and progressive in addressing the needs of your community. And really specific to this situation is that if you don't do anything, if you don't do the 25, 26, or 27 financing, and you need to do something in 27 or 28, you're gonna have a spike in your tax rate. Because you're gonna go from 0 to 100, and whatever that tax rate is, it is, and there's nothing you can do to avoid it. By phasing in these projects, and even if they're more, you have the ability to mitigate that peak and valley in your tax rate, because we will structure the debt around your existing debt, meaning as it falls off, then we'll ramp up principal payments so that there's a very minimal fluctuation.
Municipal financing is different than individual financing. We have to have debt in order to survive.
Correct.
But
Especially for
controlled
residents,
debt.
You have no other option.
Yeah, but controlled debt. Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I
Sorry for going
appreciate,
long.
I appreciate you going through it. It's very important to have the information literally within the next month and to move forward. It helps us understand where we're at and where we're going. And the timing, as you said, is very beneficial with closing for opening 8 and probably 9 after that. We've got the room to do it, but it's a type of thing that returns numbers very favorable to help us control our tax.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing the wild success, and you'll see it if you're unfamiliar with TID 4, but $169 million of incremental value is astronomical. And that is all coming back online, and that means that that was a wildly successful TID. I don't know what the base value of that TID was, but that would have never happened if the city wasn't open to this type of development financing.
Good. So thank you very much. Again,
Thanks, Kayla.
council, if you have questions, get them to Tim, and Tim can certainly touch base. But we do appreciate the information and our timeline. Tim, you have already scheduled that out. I think I've seen
Correct, yeah, it'll
some
be
of
the end of
that.
June, we'll be back for debt issuance and potentially TID creation.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good trip back. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.